everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gita Mary and today is another impact video. As always, you can also find the script to this video if you would prefer to read it down below. This was actually a subscriber request. I think this was such a great idea. The impact of fast foods is something that we really need to be aware of and that we really need to talk about as well. But before we really get into it, this video is sponsored. This video is sponsored by Skillshare, and if you don't know Skillshare already, where have you been? I talk about them often. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of different courses, and you can learn, well, yeah, basically everything. Now, in context of food, there's definitely a lot to learn on Skillshare, and now that we're going to talk about fast food, what better course to start with than this amazing vegan burger course? Just saying. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium. Thank you so much for sponsoring this video. I thought it would be kind of relevant. Now let's get back into the video. Because I am not vegan for my health whatsoever. I love vegan fast food so much. But I don't think it makes sense to not talk about the impact of this industry. I think that is actually extremely important. Also, just in general context of sustainability versus convenience and how we as consumers have become accustomed to a level of convenience that most of us, at least, by no means necessarily need. So you could say that in today's video, we're not gonna be having a happy meal. I'm so sorry for using this tired metaphor, but I just couldn't help myself. Okay, moving on. I also have a small disclaimer before we get started. Now, I know there are lots of other issues other than sustainability and the environmental issue that impacts this industry and that impacts people. For instance, the social imbalance that comes with fast food restaurant placement, the inherent privilege of being able to choose a more expensive food over the cheapest offers that is available, and let's not forget about the low wages of service workers. There's so many other things to talk about, and I just really wanted to make sure that it's out there that I do also understand that this all factors in. Today we're just going to be talking about the environmental impact because that's sort of what this platform is about, but there are other aspects as well, a lot of social issues especially. And if you're on a tight budget, then check out the link down below to a video with 50 tips that you can do that are sustainable but also free. Now, most of our environmental problems today come from overconsumption, which means that it's not the people who work 3 jobs and have minimal wage that are causing the environmental issues that we see here. It's people who are in a privileged position, like myself, that choose not to do anything or choose to buy the worst products when they do have the option not to. This, of course, does not mean that the sustainable actions of people who earn minimum wage does not matter. It does. Greatly. This is simply to highlight one of the issues that is both with fast food and so many other industries, overconsumption. So take from this video what you can and change the things that you do have control over. Now, let's begin. The fast food market size is valued at $885 billion in 2021. And among the biggest chain stores, McDonald's has 35,000 restaurants worldwide. KFC has 18,000. Subway has more than 42,000 restaurants. Starbucks has 23,000 locations. Burger King has 13,000. Domino's has 10,000 and Pizza Hut has 6,000 locations. And the impact is staggering. I'm dividing the impact up into some different categories simply just to make this more organized, and the first one being, if cows were a country, they would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. So you can probably guess that this is going to be about the ingredients. Because just like with fast fashion, one of the reasons why these products are so cheap, other than the fact that the people who produce them are not really getting paid, is because that it automatically becomes cheaper to produce goods in larger quantities. The bigger the order, the smaller the price of the individual product. In a similar fashion, the fast food industry has paved the way for extremely cheap meat products. In the USA alone, McDonald's sells more than 1 billion pounds of beef every single year. Think about how much that is on a global scale, and then add pork and chicken and seafood and dairy. And just because the price per item is lower when we produce a lot of it doesn't mean that the impact is lower as well. Fast food meat products are also particularly low in price because a lot of extra ingredients is added to thin out the meat. As such, you rarely get a 100% meat product when you buy fast food. At least that's the case when there is no law against this practice. There is some places, but other places there really isn't. And this is also one of the main reasons why vegan or vegetarian dishes are often more expensive than their equal-sized meat counterparts. It's supply and demand. It's more expensive to buy less than an item than more of an item, weirdly enough. And of course, this poses a huge issue in terms of the availability and affordability of sustainable foods. As long as it's cheaper to buy hamburgers rather than veggie burgers, more people will find it more attractive and affordable, and some people won't have a choice but to choose the cheapest option. But is this all the consumer's fault? She asked very leadingly. We cannot forget the huge and intense amount of meat and dairy lobbying that constantly affects the political system. These industries have a lot of pull and a lot of resources, and they routinely use them to gain political power. They keep prices of their products down by pressing for tax benefits by the government. And they also lobby for lower environmental restrictions, which should be pissing everyone off. As such, the availability and the cheap prices of fast food items, it's not something that is being made possible by the restaurants alone. It's also very much indeed something that's realized by politics. However, the narrative concerning the consequences and effect of fast food suggests that it's solely the consumer's fault for buying the products. For instance, in 2005, the House of Representatives passed an act that forbade consumers to sue fast food operators over weight gain. The Cheeseburger Bill, formerly known as the Personal Responsibility in Food Consumption Act, attempted to legislate the message that the cost of fast food are personal, not social, and certainly not a consequence of selling harmful foods at addictively low prices. In the book Supersizing Urban America, it's described in much detail how these fast food chains are only able to provide the offers that they are because they're being given massive benefits by the government. Furthermore, this is not only a US issue, this is something that happens all over the world, and especially so in Denmark as well. I have talked about this many times before, but alas, let's do it anyway. There are countless issues with the meat and dairy industry this big, and I've left my impact video about animal agriculture and specifically factory farming down below, so go check that out if you're interested in knowing more details. But the consequences of animal agriculture and specifically factory farming include destruction of rainforests to make room for cattle ranches, soil and water pollution, the consequences of overusing antibiotics, CO2 and methane emissions, the bottom line being an industry that's based on producing the cheapest meat products possible is never good for the planet. Period. But do I only have beef with meat? Again, I don't know what's up with the puns and the metaphors today. While the vast overconsumption of meat and dairy is truly and utterly problematic, there are actually other ingredients, also plant-based ingredients, that also pose a big issue. One of them is something that's typically described as a very sustainable ingredient, but of course, alas, they had to take that away from us as well, and that's potatoes. Now, even though it might not look like it, most fast food restaurants have really high aesthetic standards for their products, which means that when it comes to sourcing the ingredients, they can be quite picky, and of course that leads to a lot of food waste. And the food might be perfectly good to eat, it might just have a small knot or a blemish or a brown spot, but oftentimes they're perfectly fine to eat. Not all foods look like their stock image photo. For instance, McDonald's uses a type of potato called russet Burbank. This sort is known to grow very long. However, russet Burbank is naturally inclined to have spots and brown blemishes on them, and to avoid this, McDonald's farmers use an extremely toxic pesticide blend. This makes the potatoes so toxic that they have to be stored safely to gas off for 6 weeks before being shipped out. All of this effort for a purely aesthetic purpose. In terms of impact of the ingredients, I think it's also really important to mention excessive use of palm oil, which the fast food industry is definitely guilty of, and I have an entire video about just that. I'll leave that down below as well. Then there's also the excessive use of other types of oils and sugar, which also comes with a big impact. Now, transportation. Everything has to be transferred at least into some extent, and transportation is not necessarily the worst part of the impact of the product, or it generally doesn't have to be. Overall, the part of the impact of the product that's accounted for by transportation is not necessarily very high unless it's transported by plane. However, there's really no point in denying that the impact of transportation is actually something that we need to account for as well. And items that are being transferred less generally seem to have a lower impact than products that are being transferred really, really far. At least that's often the case. One of the signifiers of global fast food change is that the food is pretty much the same wherever you go in the world. Now, you can see variations in the menu, but for the most part the items are identical, and that's because they all come from the same place. All fries for McDonald's are grown on the same farms and shipped out into the world. In contrast, it would be a lot more sustainable for restaurants to rely on local suppliers, so the transportation would be kept to a minimum. But then the product wouldn't be exactly the same, which somehow is the reason, but that's really idiotic. Plus, transporting goods very far often means more packaging, which we don't want. Also, fast food restaurants usually get their customers while they're young. And this might not look like a sustainability aspect or a sustainability angle, but it really is. Because it's not out of the goodness of their hearts that many fast food restaurants spend so many resources advertising to children, building playgrounds, hosting birthday parties, and creating mascots. Because countless studies show that our eating habits and our eating preferences as adults are heavily affected by our associations and memories from childhood. So it's really no coincidence that so many fast food restaurants spend so much time reaching out to children, making themselves relevant to children, even though they don't have any money to spend themselves. Because in a few years, they'll be coming back. And that is especially true if they weren't allowed to have these foods as kids. No matter what, this image, this association of feeling like you're living your best life as a kid at a McDonald's birthday party will haunt you for the rest of your life and is very likely to influence your adult food choices. This is, by the way, not a marketing strategy that is in any way, shape or form exclusive to the fast food industry, because some of my most fond memories from childhood was sponsored by our country's biggest dairy corporation. Coincidence? Nope. Also, from a sustainability point of view, it can actually be really problematic that young kids from a very young age grow accustomed to very salty, processed, sweet, sugary foods, because that makes them much less likely to choose whole foods later in life. Now, when talking about the impact of fast food, it's really hard to not talk about packaging. With the convenience of fast food comes packaging, and it's only within the recent few years that I have seen fast food chains actually do just a little something to try and reduce the amount of waste that their products generate. Most restaurants serve their food in paper cups with paper wrapping and with cardboard boxes. However, it's very rarely that these products can be recycled, because once they've been in contact with food and when there's grease stains on them and stuff like that, they cannot be recycled. Also, most of these products actually contain a thin lining or coating of plastic to avoid leakage and spilling, which makes them mixed materials, which also makes them unrecyclable. Sometimes I also see restaurants using styrofoam boxes, and at this point I just feel like that's a straight up hate crime. Styrofoam is a type of plastic, it's a type 7 plastic labeled other, and it means that it very rarely can be recycled. But what it doesn't do in recycling, it makes up for in ocean pollution, because it's very lightweight and it's very fragile. So styrofoam in general is a huge problem, and it also leaks very dangerous chemicals whenever it's in contact with hot food. Now, I have actually seen some restaurants do just a little bit to try and generate less waste. One of the things that I've seen is that when you eat in restaurants, you get a reusable cup that they will then wash and use again, only straws upon request, this sort of stuff, but of course these are very small steps. Also, about 10% of all food packaging in the world is produced for fast food. Furthermore, most fast food wrappings contain a coating that makes it grease repellent, and a study involving scientists at 5 institutions collaborated on a report which collected more than 400 samples of fast food packaging from 27 leading US chains. They found that 1 in 3 of these packagings contained harmful chemicals that are similar to water repellents and non-stick coatings. These are known carcinogens and hormone disruptors, and they're directly absorbed in our bodies through the food that we eat. I also think there's a point to be made in terms of the fast in fast food. See, what happens when we expect our food to be ready for us to consume it 2 minutes after we've ordered it is that a lot of people are working really hard and really fast to make that happen for us, and that can also generate a lot of waste. As a result, we can often end up with 10 napkins and 5 bags of ketchup, and there's really no need for this. This is of course not on the service workers who did this to begin with, but it's on the overall corporate policy of that company. Not hating on service workers, you guys are doing your damn best. So let's summarize and also come up with some things that we can do to be more sustainable when we are eating fast food. First of all, choosing whole foods over processed foods is a really good step. If you go to a fast food place, this is not always even an option for you, but generally the less processed the food is, the less steps in the supply chain, less waste, less impact, less transportation overall. So that's a really good starting point. Also, choosing water rather than sugary drinks is also more sustainable, because again, longer supply chain, sugar, impact, okay. Packaging, yeehaw. An even better option is also simply just to order your meal without a drink and then have your own reusable water bottle on the side with water. from the tap. One of the points that I really want to highlight here as well is that if you're going to buy fast food, which I am in no way, shape or form shaming or judging people for doing, I also do that sometimes. But one of the things that I really like to do is that I like to choose more local, national, regional chains and restaurants rather than big corporations or simply completely independent restaurants that are not a chain. Also, choose the plant-based option. If you haven't really tried a lot of vegan or plant-based foods, then start out with a vegetarian option and work your way from there. It makes such a huge difference, especially if you cut out dairy and beef specifically, but work your way down the list of impactful foods. I get that a lot of people might not know a lot about making vegan foods at home, but especially when we're out in restaurants, choose a restaurant that does have vegan options and try them out and gather inspiration from that. Experience some of the different vegan options that are available. And you can also use Happy Cow to find restaurants that specifically have vegan options, so you won't, just get like a bun with some lettuce and tomato. That's not everything it is. It can be so much more. Experiment with it, dabble back and forth. You don't have to identify with any label to eat more sustainably. Also, and this is very basic, but still sometimes I feel like we should mention it, because just because something is cheap doesn't mean that we can just freely overconsume it. So don't buy more than you know that you can actually eat. To this, when you order at restaurants, also see if you can use your own containers. Not every place allows this, especially not when we're in the middle of a global panini. But still, I have had a lot of luck just having water or soda, for that matter, in my own reusable drinking bottle, and sometimes I've also had the luck of not getting a lot of packaging on my things, and then I've simply just transferred it from the little tray you get and onto my own containers afterwards. There are some different ways of doing this, and it does reduce waste, but there are other things that of course has a bigger impact, like choosing what kind of food that we get. Of course. Also, if you can, refuse the disposables that you get with the meal. If you're going home to eat and you have cutlery there, then ask for no cutlery, ask for no condiments, all this kind of stuff if you don't need it. Same thing goes for napkins, straws, all this stuff. Simply just tell the people politely and in a friendly manner that you don't need it, that they shouldn't bother or worry about it, because you'll be fine. And lastly, help and engage with NGOs and other organizations to hold these big corporate companies accountable for their actions and push for political change. This is just so incredibly important, and there are several organizations that specifically work with and against big fast food corporations and continuously try to push them to be more sustainable and to be honest and transparent about their impact, to change their policies. That was it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and also thank you to the subscriber who mentioned the impact of fast food. Gita Mary, can you do something? Can, did. Hope you enjoyed it. Also, a big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. You can still find all the information you need down below. And if you want to make my day, like this video, subscribe, comment, etc. It makes my day every time. And I just love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day and take really good care of yourselves. Until next time. Bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green, zero-waste content, and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!